as the sun rose just above the horizon of the dry Sahel. The first light swept across the Batenga toll station like a thin golden veil settling over a machine waking up. There were no impatient car horns. No drivers leaning out to shout in frustration. No hands quietly reaching out to receive the familiar under-the-table bills of the old days. There was only a steady, rhythmic line of vehicles moving forward as if the entire area had been programmed for order and efficiency. The overhead LED lights blinked softly. The barrier lifted at the exact moment it should. The receipt printer clicked with a crisp, clean sound. Small actions, almost meaningless in many parts of the world, carried an unusual weight in Burkina Faso. Because this country had lived too long with the chaos of paperwork. With traffic jams caused by arguments over loose change. With delays not because of the road, but because of people. Yet this morning in Batenga, every movement felt pure, as if the nation were shedding an old layer of dust, revealing what it had always had the potential to become. A truck driver from Ouagadougou pulled into the automatic lane, tapped his payment card against the windshield. The camera scanned in a fraction of a second, flashed, and let him pass. He looked into the rearview mirror and exhaled. No more pushing, no more waiting, no more preparing extra cash for things that never appeared on the invoice. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. A change not on the asphalt, but in the air. But to understand the meaning of this moment, you have to look back at the very road he was driving on. Just a few years earlier, it was a test of patience for every citizen. Potholes deep enough to swallow a wheel. Sections that vanished underwater each rainy season. Truckloads of crops abandoned because they couldn't make it to the market. The worst part wasn't the crumbling road, it was the feeling of being forgotten. The feeling that no matter how loudly people complained, no matter how much they hoped, no one showed up to fix what was clearly broken. The people of Burkina Faso had grown used to accepting things. Accepting bad roads. Accepting half-finished projects. Accepting promises that never came with results. And that acceptance was the chain holding them down more than any hole in the ground ever could. Then the turning point came when the young leader of the nation, Captain Traoré, showed up, not in a polished conference room, but in the mud of a construction site. Not to justify, but to command, not to apologize, but to reset the rules. In that moment, Burkina Faso understood that the old era was over. A new one was beginning, one where no one could afford to work carelessly. No one could dare deceive the people, and every public dollar had to produce a real meter of road. The Batenga toll station this morning is only a small slice of that larger picture. But it is the perfect slice, clear, quiet, undeniable, because here, people don't need grand speeches to know their country is running differently. They just need to watch the barrier rise. Watch the cars pass without interruption. Watch their time, for the first time, being respected. From this very calmness, a bigger question rises. What has truly changed? A modern toll system? An automated procedure? Or is this the opening chapter of a journey Burkina Faso never dared to dream of? A journey where each road becomes more than a path, it becomes a declaration. That they will stand up, rebuild, and shape their future with their own hands on their own land. Because sometimes, a nation doesn't need gunfire or loud calls to start a revolution. Sometimes, all it takes is a morning like this, when a toll station works exactly the way it should, to signal that dawn is coming. And this time, it is rising in a way no one can stop. The pure morning in Batenga was like a mirror reflecting something far greater happening inside the nation. Because the order, transparency, and precision people witnessed at the toll station today did not appear out of thin air. It was born from another moment, fiercer, more shocking, and deeply transformative, the moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the Ouagadougou road, where just a few months after being rehabilitated, the pavement split open like a confession. That road had once been declared complete. Reports were filed in full. Inspection photos were all there. The contractor, Surubat, signed the handover on schedule. But few asked the most important question: where was the real quality? People drove on it every day, and they answered with a shake of the head. Small cracks widened, the asphalt sank, Rainwater pooled into puddles as if mocking the promises once made. And eventually, no one could pretend things were fine. The road did not fail because of weather. It failed because of neglect. When Captain Traoré arrived, there were no red ribbons, no ceremonial speeches, only a heavy atmosphere, a blend of disappointment and anger. The delegation stood under the sun, the burnt smell of asphalt still lingering. Some Sarubat engineers tried to explain. They spoke of increased traffic. They spoke of unusual rainfall. They spoke of unforeseen factors. But none of them spoke of responsibility. None spoke of the truth. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked along the road, crouched down, touched the broken pieces of asphalt, then lifted his head and looked straight at the contractor's representative. One sentence, sharp and final like a blade hitting the table. No repairs. No patchwork. No excuses. Rebuild everything. From the start. With your own money. Because this road belongs to the people, not to your pretty reports. That moment echoed through the air like a shockwave. Not because he shouted, but because his words struck at the deepest, oldest disease of the nation. Complacency. For years, many contractors had grown used to rushing. Cutting corners. Doing half the job. Then walking away. Reports were filled. Paperwork was stamped. But the results were always missing a soul. And when no one was held accountable, no one dared demand better. Traoré's action did more than force Sarubat to rebuild a road. It shattered an entire pattern, a system where public funds evaporated without scrutiny. Where quality was sacrificed for private gain. Where infrastructure meant for the people became profit for a few. When he stood there, in the mud and concrete, the story was no longer about a damaged road. It was about dignity. Even more striking was the reaction of the people. Many had lived with disappointment for so long that when they saw a leader standing directly on a broken road, they weren't sure whether to believe or doubt. But when they heard his decisive order, they realized what they had been missing wasn't just a road. It was the feeling that someone was finally standing on their side. From that moment on, a quiet landmark was set. Other contractors grew nervous. Ministries became more cautious. Those who once played casually with public works understood that the era of carelessness was over. The entire system of national infrastructure felt as if it had been placed under a new kind of light, one that allowed no hiding. The Ouagadougou road was rebuilt afterwards. Meter by meter, layer by layer, in the literal sense, but the true structure being rebuilt was not the road itself. It was trust. Trust that when taxpayers' money is spent, it must create something lasting. Trust that when power is placed in a leader's hands, that power is used to protect the people, not protect the old ways. If Batenga is the moment when the new order revealed itself, then Ouagadougou is the moment when the old order ended. And sometimes, for a nation to move forward, it must begin not by building something new, but by tearing down what should never have existed in the first place. After breaking apart the old system at Ouagadougou, what came next was not a movement fueled by slogans, but a determination that spread like fire through dry grass. A nation once used to waiting for blueprints from cold European offices began putting its own pen to its own paper. The Faso MEBO program was born not as a campaign with an expiration date, but as a declaration that the Burkinabe people would carve their own path, literally and figuratively. Faso MEBO simply means the road of the Burkinabe. But behind that humble name is a powerful philosophy. This road would not be borrowed from someone else. It would not be outlined by experts who had never felt how brutal a Sahel rainy season could be. It would not be shaped by donor organizations more concerned with reports than with real life. This road would be built by the hands of people who understood the land, the sky, and the long, aching weight of their communities. The first pillar of the program was the use of local materials. Not because there were no alternatives, but because this was the right one. The Dono technique, a soil compression method with Japanese roots that Burkina Faso adapted to its own terrain, became the heart of the movement. Thanks to Dono, places that once paid high prices for imported materials could now build roads using the very earth beneath their feet. This technique not only lowered costs but also returned ownership to rural communities long left behind. Images of remote villages building their first self-made roads quickly became symbols. Men who had only known farming learned to measure soil, compact it, and check moisture levels. Women, once seen only as support, now stood tall, operating graders like real technicians. Children watched from the roadside, their eyes shining with pride as they saw their parents working. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. They were doing something previous generations never had the chance to do. They were opening a road not only for the trucks of tomorrow, but for the futures of their children. The second pillar of Faso Mibo was creating jobs for young people. In a country where tens of thousands once had to leave their villages because there was no work, this program became a turning point. Youth groups received hands-on training, from soil testing and material mixing to machinery operation. For many, it was their first time earning stable income. But what mattered more than the money was the feeling of being needed. A young man in Yatenga once said in an interview that he never imagined a day when he would help build his nation in such a direct, tangible way, not through ballots, not through promises, but with his own dirt-covered hands. The third pillar, and the one that transformed the program into a true revolution, was giving communities the power to oversee construction. For the first time, citizens were assigned the duty of monitoring quality. No distant offices hundreds of kilometers away. No inspection teams showing up only when photos were needed. Every road had a local oversight group responsible for tracking progress, identifying mistakes, and demanding corrections. Immediate accountability, immediate transparency, and trust finally began to take root right where the roads were being built. What mattered most was that anyone could see the change with their own eyes. When a road is built by the people who live beside it, its quality depends not only on technique but on pride. No one wants the road in front of their home to crumble after the first rainy season. No one wants to be remembered by their village as the one who worked carelessly. Self-discipline became a new form of honor. Faso Mibo, therefore, did more than smooth out rough terrain. It leveled a much bigger gap, the gap between the government and the people. Every meter of finished road was a statement that this nation was done waiting for someone else to rescue it. Burkina Faso had begun rescuing itself by opening its own path forward. As the brown earth roads of Faso Mibo began reconnecting lands long divided by time and neglect, a natural question emerged. Building roads mattered, but were roads alone enough to carry a nation into the future? Burkina Faso wanted to move faster, to see further, to break free from the past's definition of it as a land of sun, wind, and poverty. And to do that, it needed more than smooth pavement. It needed something else. It needed a nervous system for the entire country. In 2025, while many African nations were still debating how to use technology in governance, Burkina Faso chose to step straight into the digital era, not through long conferences, but through concrete action. More than 900 smart traffic cameras were installed along national highways RN1, RN4, and other strategic routes. Each camera didn't just see, it understood. It tracked speed, density, direction. It sent warnings about congestion, accidents, bottlenecks. It connected to a central control room in the capital, where a digital map of the country appeared clearly for the first time, like the heartbeat of a living organism. But the cameras were only the visible part of the iceberg. For those eyes to see at the same time, Burkina Faso quietly laid more than 3.000 kilometers of fiber optic cable stretching across towns, villages, sand dunes, and scrublands. Those cables didn't just carry data, they carried a new philosophy of governance. Every signal transmitted was a statement that the country would no longer base decisions on instinct or habit. Everything had to be seen, measured, verified. The new toll stations became places where technology and reality merged. When drivers passed through Batenga, Tintalou, or Ouagadougou, cameras scanned plates, systems logged timestamps, sensors captured traffic flow, and everything was sent to the center in seconds. On some mornings, engineers could predict where a traffic jam would happen 2 hours in advance just by looking at the main screen. On some afternoons, the system sent early warnings that helped drivers avoid an accident miles away. And in some moments, A single camera saved a life by spotting a stranded vehicle at night on an empty stretch of road. But what turned the system into a true revolution wasn't the technology. It was the change in the way people saw their own government. For years, Burkinabe citizens believed two worlds existed side by side. The world on paper, where everything functioned perfectly, and the real world, where everything was messy, slow, and opaque. Smart Burkina became the bridge between those two worlds. For the first time, data was public. For the first time, the toll system couldn't be cheated. For the first time, revenue reports matched actual receipts. And when trust appeared in one small place, it spread like groundwater finally finding a path to flow. More than 800 new telecom towers rose in areas that old maps simply left blank. Each tower was a sturdy beacon pulling remote villages into the digital sphere. People no longer walked dozens of kilometers just to submit a form. Teachers could send reports from their phones. Clinic workers could call an ambulance from places once considered invisible on the map. Roads had reconnected them. Technology helped them finally see each other. At the intersection of roads and data, Burkina Faso began shaping a new identity. No longer the nation of crumbling forts or muddy paths. No longer the symbol of slow, helpless delay. A system was forming, slowly, steadily, run not only by machines but by a will to change. And in every signal flashing from those cameras along the Sahel, one message was unmistakably clear. Burkina Faso is not just building roads to move. Burkina Faso is building a nervous system to know exactly where it is going. When smart cameras began blinking along RN1 and RN4. When new roads were finished by the hands of Burkinabe workers. When toll stations operated as smoothly as a Swiss machine. Something else also began to happen. Something that didn't appear in official newspapers and didn't show up in ceremonial speeches. It was the discomfort of those who had long been used to defining Burkina Faso's future. For decades, the country lived inside a pattern everyone understood but few dared to name. If you wanted infrastructure, you had to wait for funding. To get funding, you waited for approval. To get approval, you accepted conditions. And by the time it was all done, the roads built carried debts heavier than their actual length. The infrastructure belonged to the people. But the decisions belonged to someone else, far away. Thousands of kilometers from Burkina Faso. But in 2024 and 2025, when Traoré announced that the government would use domestic money to build roads, when foreign contractors were held fully accountable, when the toll system stopped having any room for hidden costs, the West began to feel the old order cracking. Articles appeared, not openly attacking, but sharp as razor blades. They said Burkina Faso was drifting away from international standards. They said Faso MEBO lacked sustainability. They said the automated toll system was just a temporary layer of modernization. The common thread behind all these arguments was the same silent assumption. A country like Burkina Faso could not possibly run such a large system without outside direction or guidance. But reality was writing a different story. Inside the ministries, gone were the days of foreign experts riding around in luxury SUVs, producing reports no one could implement. In their place were young Burkinabe engineers standing on construction sites with laptops, drawings, and a confidence the country had never seen before. One engineer from Ouagadougou said he never imagined he would work on a project where every decision was made by people from his own country. No orders from afar, no imposed oversight. They were responsible, literally, for every meter of poured asphalt, every tightened bolt. What the West didn't say out loud was the real issue: a shift in power. When Burkina Faso reduced its dependence on foreign advisors, when projects were no longer boxed into timelines designed by donor institutions, the country took back its own steering wheel. And that created unease for old systems that had grown comfortable with African nations operating under their supervision. There was a time when Burkina Faso had to prove its competence through checklists designed in Paris or Brussels. But now, its only gold standard was real effectiveness. If a road stood firm, that was the standard. If toll revenue matched the data, that was the standard. If citizens trusted the system, That was the standard. Sovereignty no longer existed only in political textbooks. It was measured by the speed of traffic on RN1 after the rainy season. At the same time, Burkina Faso didn't shut itself off from the world. It simply changed how it opened its doors. It chose partners who came to cooperate, not to interfere. New agreements with Morocco, with African financial institutions, with countries that imposed no political conditions, proved that this nation was not anti-West. It was anti-dependence. That is a thin line. But it is the line that separates a free nation from a forgettable one. In cabinet meetings, people no longer talked endlessly about aid. They talked about domestic resources. They no longer asked, "Who will fund this road?" but, "How will we complete it with our own strength?" It is the quietest revolution, yet the most powerful one. Because a people only becomes confident when they know their future doesn't depend on someone else's signature. In the West, many call it populism. But for the Burkinabe, it is simply a return to dignity. And sometimes, a nation must step out of someone else's shadow to finally understand that it is not as small as it once believed. When smart cameras covered the transport network and when the new roads began to reflect the collective strength of the people, Burkina Faso realized an unavoidable truth. No matter how sophisticated a nervous system is, it collapses if the heart doesn't have the energy to keep beating. Every form of progress will eventually hit a ceiling if the country still depends on expensive, unstable energy sources tied to the luck of global markets. And so the Third Great Revolution began, one that unfolded not on the ground, but in the sky. Burkina Faso sits under one of the harshest belts of sunlight on Earth. For years, the sun and the dryness were seen as the twin burdens of the Sahel. But the very thing considered a curse became the nation's strongest asset once it chose to rewrite its own energy story. The first map of the Burkina Digital and Green 2030 program didn't start with giant steel structures or coal plants. It started with light. The 30 megawatts PA solar plant was completed not through the glitter of international corporations, but through a decision to localize technology. When the first solar panels were installed, locals stood on the red soil and witnessed something they had never seen in their lives. The sun's energy wasn't just captured, it was transformed into electricity, into light, into a new pulse for the entire region. On the first nights when PA Solar was connected to the national grid, light spread across roads that had once been swallowed by darkness. The solar-powered streetlights no longer had to wait for diesel shipments from distant depots. They shone using the one thing Burkina Faso had more than enough of: sunlight. A teacher living near PA said that in the past, whenever the classroom went dark, the lesson had to stop. Children couldn't study because the entire village fell into night. Now, a single solar lamp on a porch brought kids together in small groups to read. What seemed like a simple scene was actually a profound shift. When light reaches the forgotten places, hope comes with it. But PA Solar was only the beginning. Zagtuli, the solar icon of West Africa, continued to expand. Not only powering the capital but delivering stable energy to road monitoring stations, data centers, and hundreds of new telecom towers rising like markers of a nation awakening. Roads, cameras, data hubs, automated toll systems, all required constant energy. If the country depended on imported fuel, every step forward would stand on shaky ground. But when energy was created on its own soil, Burkina Faso gained more than electricity. It gained control, it gained autonomy, it gained the certainty that its future could not be switched off by someone else's crisis. Most striking of all, electric two-wheel charging stations began to appear in major cities. The sight of young people stopping to charge their bikes along RN1 became a symbol of a new era. No one forced them to use clean energy. They chose it, because they saw it as the future. And that future belonged to them. What set Burkina Faso apart wasn't the number of megawatts or the number of panels installed. It was the philosophy behind the movement. Traoré once said in a national meeting, "We do not modernize to imitate anyone. We modernize to fit ourselves." Technology has meaning only when it serves the people. Energy has value only when it lights up the places that were once forgotten. For years, The world looked at Burkina Faso with pity or suspicion. But when the first rays from the solar plants lit up the red earth, that image began to shake. A nation once seen as fragile had found a way to turn sunlight into capital, barren land into foundation, and longing into power. And from the rows of solar panels stretching across the Sahel sky, a message rose, not spoken, but shining. Burkina Faso is no longer standing in someone else's shadow. They are lighting their own path. Some changes arrive with the noise of machinery, with lively inauguration ceremonies, with impressive numbers announced on the news. But some changes slip quietly into daily life, slowly, gently, like an underground stream finally finding a path after years of being blocked. That was the kind of change happening in Burkina Faso. A change not measured by kilometers of road or megawatts of power, but by the most fragile and priceless thing a nation can possess: trust. Trust is not a gift. It cannot be declared in a speech. It is built through small actions that people can see, touch, and verify. It comes when promises no longer stand alone, but walk side by side with proof. And in Burkina Faso's infrastructure reforms, that proof began appearing so frequently that the people could no longer ignore it. At the Tintalou toll station, once a hotspot of traffic jams and arguments, there is now only the steady sound of automatic plate scanners. A long-distance bus driver from Ouagadougou said that in the past, every visit to a toll station meant preparing himself for trouble of all kinds. Over time, he accepted it as a normal part of life. But since automation began, he hasn't spent more than 5 minutes at a station. What shocked him even more was that for the first time in his life, the amount he paid matched perfectly with the receipt. Not less, not more, and no one asking for anything extra. A small change, but enough to erase years of feeling unfairly treated. In another corner of the country, inside a logistics company office in Bobo Dioulasso, a transport manager monitored routes through a screen connected to smart cameras. Before, he had to guess traffic conditions from experience or depend on vague messages from drivers. Now, with one glance at the digital map, he knew exactly which routes were clear and which were in trouble. Transport costs dropped, deliveries arrived on time, and most importantly, he could manage his work with certainty instead of guesswork. For him, it wasn't a miracle, it was simply what a responsible state should have done long ago. Farther away, in places where signal used to be a luxury, new telecom towers changed the rhythm of life. A teacher on the outskirts of Kaya said that in the past, whenever she needed to submit a report or receive new materials, she had to walk more than 8 kilometers to the nearest town. Now, she only needed to turn on her phone. A small task, but for her, it was a sign of existence. For years, she felt forgotten in a place the capital cared about only when statistics were needed. Now, a single telecom tower standing on the horizon was enough to remind her that the state was finally looking in her direction. Even the most skeptical citizens began to shift their view. In a 2025 Afrobarometer survey, Burkina Faso recorded a sharp rise in trust toward the government, far higher than many countries in the region. Those numbers didn't come from propaganda. They came from experience. People saw new roads surviving their first rainy season.
Breakaway states
They saw
Burkina
cameras
Faso
clearing
and
bottlenecks that had haunted them for years. They saw financial reports from the infrastructure sector published openly instead of being hidden away. All these pieces added up to a simple but powerful realization. The system is working. And it is working for them. In any nation that has suffered too many losses, trust is usually the first thing to break and the last thing to return. But in Burkina Faso, something unusual happened. Trust did not come back through vague optimism, it returned through evidence. It did not come back through slogans, it returned through concrete experience. It did not return from somewhere outside, it sprouted from everyday life. On late afternoons, when the solar-powered streetlights lit up along RN1, people didn't just see light, they saw the seriousness of a state doing the right thing. They saw responsibility being carried out. And in that light, they began to see themselves again. People who once accepted negligence began demanding quality. People who once gave up began expecting more. A nation changes not only when new roads are built. A nation changes when its people believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. And in Burkina Faso, that trust is returning, quietly, steadily, as solid as the new roads compacted from their own earth. Burkina Faso was once a name the world mentioned only with cold phrases like poverty, instability, drought, terrorism, a forgotten land, a name that lived in the shadow of negative statistics, as a footnote in international reports. But the new roads, the solar panels stretching under the Sahel sun, the smart cameras quietly watching every flow of traffic, all of them helped awaken a different kind of conversation. Not a conversation between the government and the people, but between Burkina Faso and its own reflection. A nation that wants to change must face the truth. Burkina Faso did that, but it didn't stop at recognizing its weaknesses. It began to redefine its strengths. What surprised the world was not how many kilometers of road the country could build or how many toll stations it could operate. What surprised the world was how Burkina Faso chose who would write its story. In the past, that story was always written from the outside. Every page carried the imprint of donor organizations, of experts allergic to Sahel dust, of commentators who had never stepped into rural Burkina Faso yet felt confident judging what was appropriate for this nation. Burkina Faso was always seen from afar, and almost never heard up close. But when citizens began building roads with their own hands, when the toll system produced transparent numbers, when smart cameras recorded every moment on the country's highways, something new appeared. Burkina Faso finally had a real mirror, one not held by someone else. They looked into it and, for the first time, saw themselves clearly. In a small village near Ziniare, an elderly farmer said he once believed his country was trapped in permanent poverty. But when the Faso-Mibo road passed through, he began to see students from other villages arriving earlier to school. Motorbikes carrying produce sped toward the markets. And most importantly, he felt he was no longer forgotten. When asked how he felt about the change, he said just one simple sentence: "I finally see this country moving forward. Not in words, but right under my feet." In the capital, a young engineering student monitored a real-time national traffic map. He said that in the past, studying technology in Burkina Faso felt like studying something distant. Everything had to be modeled after another country. Now he learns from data produced by his own homeland. A camera on RN4 teaches lessons more real than any simulation. The new telecom towers aren't illustrations in a textbook. They are places he can visit and study. He said that for the first time, he didn't feel born to leave his country. He felt born to build it. A nation begins to gain confidence when its youth see their future not in a flight abroad, but in every project rising on their own soil. That is what is happening in Burkina Faso. And that quiet shift is the true foundation of a national rise. What is remarkable is that this shift in identity wasn't created by slogans hanging across the streets. It came from small things, but real things. A toll receipt printing the exact amount. A road that didn't crack after the first rainy season. A solar streetlight turning on at the right time. A remote villager finally having phone signal. Each detail was like a brick laid into the foundation of a new identity. The identity of a self-reliant nation. The world may discuss Burkina Faso in many ways, but the most important change is that Burkinabe people themselves have begun speaking about their country with a different tone. No more sighs, no more bitter statements that nothing will ever improve. Instead, a proud question: what will we achieve next? Burkina Faso is redefining itself not by comparing with great powers, but by answering a simple question: who do we want to become? And the answer does not lie in donated services or half-finished projects. It lies in every meter of road, every panel, every camera, every bold decision made by a new generation. A nation only truly grows when it recognizes its own value before demanding the world recognize it. And now, Burkina Faso is entering that moment. The moment when it no longer reflects an old image, but begins writing a new one, 1 centimeter, 1 watt of energy, 1 stream of data at a time. Afternoons in Burkina Faso always carry a special kind of light. As the sun tilts toward the west, its final rays fall on the new roads like a thin layer of gold spread across the ground. That light doesn't just illuminate the grain of the Faso Mibo earth, the smooth asphalt of RN1, or the solar panels shining across Pa and Zagtuli. It also reveals something many people once didn't dare believe. Burkina Faso is stepping into a new era, where things once seen as impossible have become everyday realities. One citizen sees a road completed on time. One teacher sees a solar lamp glowing outside her classroom. One driver sees his goods arrive without delays caused by traffic or potholes. One young man in the Sahel sees phone signal for the first time in a village that used to be a blank spot on the map. These changes may seem small to the world, but to Burkinabe people, they carry the meaning of a rebirth. For years, the people here lived with a quiet question. Will this country ever change? Will the good things they saw elsewhere ever reach their dry, forgotten land? Will the promises of reform ever become something they could touch with their own hands? The answer now isn't in words. It's beneath their feet. Because every new meter of road does more than serve transportation. It serves dignity. It says the people deserve something better. It reminds them that delays, collapse, and corruption are not destiny. And that feeling, more than anything, is the true foundation of change. When a nation begins to believe in itself, strange things start to happen. People stop accepting half-done. They stop shrugging at small injustices. They stop staying silent when transparency is missing. Questions once considered dangerous now sound reasonable. Why isn't this road finished on time? Why hasn't that project published its report? Why isn't this contractor being held accountable? The most notable change is that the government is no longer afraid of those questions. They understand that only a strong nation lets its people demand more. And only a serious government dares to stand before its citizens without hiding behind excuses. Transparent reporting, public progress updates, toll systems that can't be manipulated. Together they create an environment where trust is no longer a luxury but a natural outcome. In village meetings, people now discuss how to keep trucks from damaging the roads. In classrooms, students write essays about solar energy and the role of technology in protecting their country. In private journals, young people write dreams of becoming engineers, architects, planners, the ones who will continue the work they see being started today. The greatest change in a nation is not when roads widen or buildings rise. The greatest change is when people believe they are moving in the right direction. That belief doesn't come from slogans. It comes from results that cannot be denied. And from that belief, a new sense of responsibility appears. The sense that citizens are not just beneficiaries, but protectors, overseers, and co-authors of their own future. Burkina Faso was once called a country with nothing. No ocean. No major oil fields. No glittering cities. But from that scarcity, they discovered what matters most. The will of the people. The unity of communities. The determination to rise without waiting for miracles from outside. And now, as sunset falls over the Sahel and solar lights flicker on along the new roads, the people understand something the world is only just beginning to see. Burkina Faso's strength does not lie in what it has, but in what it dares to do. Infrastructure is only the beginning. Trust is what carries a nation forward. And right now, that trust has returned, quiet but powerful, like the very roads they built with their own hands.